Welcome to Into the End Zone, starring that guy over there, Bob Morton. We got a new. Did you see the new little sign we have for you, where you're going like that when you're playing?
Oh, I saw it. Yeah, I love that picture of myself. It's really flattering.
We need you to do that pose at some point in this game, or in this post-game show. I'm all over the place. I'm caffeinated. I'm overly caffeinated. I'm Eric Hansen. He's former Notre Dame offensive line Bob Morton. I'm just a wannabe offensive lineman who's too puny to be that. But we're here to break down Notre Dame's 49-14 win over Army at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx tonight. Notre Dame moves to 10-1. There was a lot of chaos around college football involving teams in the college football playoff bracket, and there may be some more yet to come. So we'll get to all that, and we'll take your questions. So start loading up the question queue. If you don't know how to do it, Google it, and you'll figure out how to ask us questions. But we're going to get into the game right now. And Bob, what is your number one takeaway from Notre Dame, 6th-ranked Notre Dame's 49-14 Shamrock Series victory over Army tonight?
Yeah, I think we got a new word that can kind of be used to define this team in some ways, and that's violent. I don't know if anybody saw that kind of pregame clip where they asked what we wanted to see out of our defense, and there was just this smirk on Coach Freeman's face, and with one word he said, violence. That's what he wants the defense to be. I think the defense was violent. Our offensive kind of running game, our offensive line in places was violent. Some of those places were not found on the goal line, but we'll talk about that a little bit. And I just, as I said to you a little bit ago, Eric, it feels as though this team learned in the weeks after Northern Illinois how to put their foot on the gas pedal, and they don't want to take their foot off the gas pedal anytime soon. And so, yeah, I thought you saw a really strong team performance from a lot of different facets. We'll answer questions as they come in, but it's nice to have a no-doubter really early on. Offense does their job, defense does their job, special teams gets us. I mean, being up 2 scores on Army is a really good place to be, just to start the game.
What maybe surprised you? Was there anything that surprised you about the game? And you were there, so.
Yeah. I think that it surprised me that we held Army to 1 score. I mean, after their first long drive.
Well, they got one right at the end.
Right at the end.
That's the new thing. Call timeout and get a touchdown on Notre Dame's reserves.
Yeah, no, but their drive, that first drive where they went down and scored a touchdown, I was really impressed with how different of an option attack this was compared to Navy. Navy this year does a lot of window dressing, a lot of different formations, try to get you in matchups that you don't really like, and we were ready for all of that. Army does not have a bunch of different looks that they give. Army lines up and they say, we are going to run at you with our quarterback primarily, and we're going to build off that. And we're going to live with the 3 to 3.5 yard gain the entire game. And they did that so well for a long drive there in the first quarter. And I was worried that, okay, this is going to be a game that starts to slow down and get sluggish. But then it felt like I blinked and it was a 3-and-out, or I blinked and it was a failed 4th down conversion. Like, our defense didn't feel to me like they made a bunch of big plays, but they made every play. And that was really impressive to me against an option attack that's, again, very different than what they'd seen previously with Navy.
Right. So Army was 6 of 16 on 3rd down, 1 of 4 on 4th down. This is a team that didn't turn the ball over very much at all this year. They came in number 1 in turnovers lost. They did lose a fumble early in the game. They got a punt blocked. I mean, there was a lot to like other than the field goal kicking, and that was an adventure. And I know that some people are concerned about that. Yes, you guys are doing a great job filling up the question queue. We are going to get to you. So always with these Army and Navy games, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is Army as good as what their record and their statistics and what their reputation was coming into the game? Are people still going to value this as a big win for Notre Dame, or are they going to say, it's Army? Oh, Notre Dame exposed them. They were never any good.
I mean, at this point of the year, I don't really care.
Okay.
I say that like, I don't care if people think that this is just a throwaway game, because Army and Navy were both ranked. They were both, as of 5 weeks ago, people were like, man, I don't know that Notre Dame's going to get through those two games, this year unscathed. And it was 2 wins in dominant fashion, and just dominant on all sides of the ball. And so I don't care. I mean, we're 6th in the country right now. There's been some mishaps going on ahead of us.
Right.
Like 8th in the CFB playoff already. And I think we're going to, move in that as well. So all we have to do is hold serve. What I love, though, is I do think that Army is a top 25 team. Watching their defense, the way they flew around and things like that, like when they can stay committed to stopping the run, they can do some big things. Our rushing attack really took off after that first touchdown, where it was 2nd and 1. I elbowed the guy sitting next to me and I said, it's time for a shot play. We threw for a touchdown. When we realized that we could throw the ball at will, they had to scramble to try and find ways to zone their coverage to take that away, even though they didn't necessarily. And when they take those extra guys out of the box, we started getting creases and cracks, and we've got a backfield that's going to take advantage of that all day long, because that if Jeremiah Love gets a step on somebody, he's gone. And if Jadarian Price gets a step on somebody, he's gone. What we didn't know is that if Aeneas Williams gets a step on somebody, he's gone too. And so I just think that we had a perfect game plan. We executed as well as we needed to. We still have some things to learn. I think there's a gut check for the offensive line coming, even though they did really well because of the 2 drives, the goal line kind of stands that Army had. I think there's going to be a bit of a check in the offensive meeting room about, hey, we got to be able to walk this one in. It can't be, 7 plays to get in the end zone one time.
Okay, I got 2 more questions for you. One I promised was one I always ask about Army and Navy, and then I have another one that I don't always ask. And then we're going to get to the real questions from our viewers. The first one I have is, how much of this game can carry over to USC? Because you're playing a wildly different schemes on both sides of the ball, and yet there's certainly things in which Notre Dame executed. So how much can you take from this game and bring it out to the other coast?
I think you take 2 things from this game. And you're right. There's not a lot that you're going to learn from this game to carry into next week. But what you take out of this game is, number 1, you got out of an option offense with no significant defensive injuries. And number 2, you've got your foot firmly planted, pedal to the metal on the accelerator, and you carry that momentum into LA. And I think that if you would have come in and had a hiccup or had a game that you win kind of at the end, like, I think that you can show some of your weaknesses to USC and they can exploit it in a different way. I mean, USC is going to have to look back on some film going back several weeks to figure out how we're not a juggernaut that they have to get ready for. And so I don't think that USC is intimidated by that, but I do think that we didn't give USC any film of that they can really use from this week, because we just it was like at times we were playing against air, at least when our running backs got 3 yards through the line of scrimmage. So I think that the momentum, the lack of defensive injuries, the lack of additional defensive injuries is really helpful getting ready for the last regular season game of the season.
Okay, and this bleeds a little bit into your answer and your question, but Riley Leonard was 10 of 13 tonight. His 223.3 pass efficiency rating was by far the best of his career. It's almost was a Notre Dame record. He had one pass that he threw away trying to stop the clock so they get a field goal, and he had another one where he was avoiding a sack and he just kind of threw it at a guy's feet. So he really only had one where he overthrew Jaden Greathouse in the end zone. So what are your thoughts about Riley Leonard? Did he take a step forward today, or do we not know?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to say that we know because there wasn't a whole lot of pressure on him. I knew that the passing game was going to be pretty effective, not just the quick passing game. I knew the passing game was going to be effective because there wasn't a whole lot of pressure that was going to get to him just from the down linemen. That being said, I was really impressed with what I saw from him a couple of times. There was a couple of times, and what's great about being at the game is you see the play, and then you get to look up at the screen and see the replay, even when they don't show the replay at home all the time. There were a couple of pass plays that he looked and pumped to the left and then made a read to the middle and then the right side of the field. And those little nuances just show me that he is getting more and more comfortable in Mike Denbrock's offense every single week. I mean, this is a guy that looked like he was only dropping back to take off and run in the early weeks of the year, that then developed into, hey, this guy can throw a fastball on a slant on an RPO, and then turned into, hey, when we give him time, he can actually throw the ball deep pretty well when there's nobody in his face. And then what I saw today looked like a pretty polished quarterback. Again, not against a great rush, not against a great defensive coverage team, but he was doing the little things that will move a good safety off his line to really open up pass plays in the 15 to 20-yard range downfield. So you are seeing him step up. You are seeing him come into his own at the right time. You are seeing him and Mike Denbrock and this offense start to figure out who they are and who they want to be, and also be able to change from week to week. There are going to be, games where they're just going to pound it 30 times and not even look back. Like the first 30 plays are going to be 90% run, but then there are going to be games that they're going to open up by, hey, we're going to do these quick hitting passes to get the linebackers back a little bit more. To have that versatility makes us much more dangerous than we were earlier in the year.
Okay, we've got a bunch of questions. I'm going to read off just a couple quick stats from the game. Total yards, Notre Dame had it 462 to 233. Rushing yards, they outrushed the number one team in the country, 273 to 207. Bryson Daly, Army was number one coming in pass efficiency. They got a 77.3. That's going to keep Notre Dame on top of pass efficiency defense. And I mentioned the third and the fourth downs earlier. So let's get to some real questions. Now we're going to go out of order here a little bit, so we'll get to all of you guys here and gals, if there are any of those, if Marie from Atlanta decided to show up. Jeff Stevens, time to ask, why doesn't ND target the tight ends more? Need to for the USC game? Question mark. How about that, Bob?
I love it. I was wondering where it was going to go. So why don't they target the TEs more? So I think a couple of reasons. I think obviously the one tight end that you came into this season knowing what he was capable of was Mitchell Evans, right? And Mitchell Evans, while I think I don't speak with any knowledge of him not being 100%. I just think there's a difference between when you say a player is 100% and game ready and when they feel really comfortable doing everything they've been able to do. I have seen, in the same way we've seen Riley progressing as a passer, I've seen Mitchell Evans progressing as a route runner, but more specifically as a ball carrier over the last few weeks. He's always had great hands, had the ability to make the possession catches, but we've also thrown the ball to him and let him run, and he's just been lumbering a little more earlier this year than we ever saw him do, and you're starting to see him be able to maybe spin a little bit more, kind of put his foot in the ground and drive a little bit more, learning how to drive for the first down. Again, I just think that he's getting a little bit more comfortable. Now, why we're not seeing Cooper Flanagan and Eli Raridan featured in the game, I will say – I'm going to stay on the positive side of it, Jeff, and that is to say we've got receivers who are elevating their game. And so we're blocking so much with our tight ends, and they're doing so really effectively. Eli Raridon in motion is doing a great job sealing off the backside edge or being a lead blocker. But Riley is really good at identifying when Jaden Greathouse, Bo Collins, or any of these other receivers, Jordan Faison, are in single coverage, and he's picking on that single coverage. And I think that we've got receivers who are really, again, coming into this offense well, and it's just a diversity of the offense. The only surefire thing is that we want to get our running backs going. There will be games that we need to use the tight ends. There will be games that we need to use the boundary receivers. There are games that we will be using the slot receivers. And in years past, we've become tight end U, number one, because of the great talent we've had. Number two, sometimes we haven't had the speed on the outside, and so we've needed to force feed our tight ends as possession receivers. And I think that we've got a lot of people who could qualify as a possession receiver with sure hands. They get open, and they're able to catch the ball consistently. So I just think that we've kind of got a bevy of options, and Mitchell Evans is still coming into his own as a premier route runner, pass catcher, ball carrier. And listen, I want him to be ready next weekend for the playoffs because I want people to sleep on him. I want them to be like, we don't need to worry about this big guy. And then we can just go ahead and force feed him for 87 yards sometime.
Okay, we're going to go to Scott. ND is hitting the strides at the right time. If they continue at this pace, I have to believe the CFP panel will bump ND over Penn State. Do you agree? ND is playing its best ball now. I'll let you answer first, and I'll chime in since I'm an AP voter and I have to make those kinds of decisions.
Wonderful. I will defer to your expertise, but I'm just going to go ahead and say this. Not only is it like the way Notre Dame is playing and finishing games, but it's also the way that Penn State is playing. Penn State needed 2 fourth-down conversions to beat Minnesota by 1 point today, right? And so I think that when your best game is a close loss, listen, we climbed in 2005 when we lost to USC, right? So I can relate to the fact that you can prove a lot from how your team loses, but if you don't have that true signature win, then the way you're winning starts to matter. And I think having 3, Big Ten teams in the top 4, one of these things is not like the other. Oregon and Ohio State look very different than a Penn State. And I think that some of that pretending that Penn State and IU, it's coming to fruition towards the end, I would imagine not because we're doing so well that we're going to jump them. I think they will drop behind us. That's my take. I'd love to hear what you have to say, Eric.
Okay, this isn't a question, and I don't know. I'll just put this up there.
Mal, if you're still watching, it is wonderful to hear from you. Yes, I remember meeting you with Millie and Nathan, and I'm glad that you're getting into American football. If you ever have any questions, let me know.
And I'll answer the Penn State question since I can't answer this one. It sounds like Bob knows you. He hasn't been drinking tonight. I had Notre Dame ahead of Penn State in my AP ballot last week. I do think it'll be interesting when Notre Dame plays out at USC because there will be a comparison data point, even though they didn't play USC at the same point of the season. I think USC is basically the same team with a different quarterback now. They're playing UCLA tonight. I think another thing that can help or hurt Notre Dame is what Texas A&M does, because that's still probably going to qualify as their best win, better than the Army win tonight. And then if Army recovers and wins the AAC championship game, I think that helps Notre Dame. All these little things add up, but I do think Notre Dame has a chance to move ahead of Penn State, but yet they just have to win. Let's see here. We'll go to Mike DeVoy. Bob, were you surprised by how dominant the O-line was against Army's D-line?
Yeah, I think really good question, Mike. I will say I'm going to say yes and no because I like riding the fence and I feel like it makes better stories. I was surprised because I just don't feel like Notre Dame has been really driving off the ball super well. I haven't felt like they can just line up and take it to a defensive front seven and impose their will. honestly, I feel like the last true, like, the imposition of will that gets me excited is thinking back to that last drive at Texas A&M, where you're just like, oh, if this is the O-line that we've got something special. I feel like we are assignment sound and we get a hat on a hat, but we don't always drive off the ball super well. So I was a little surprised that we were so successful with the run, but I will also say this, and I understand that there's a tinge of what might seem like disrespect, but it is not disrespect in the individuals that play or the academies or anything like that. But there is, at least in my experience, a difference when you're playing a 3, 4, 5-star athlete at USC or at Purdue or at Michigan, and when you're playing a typically undersized front seven at Army, undersized defensive lineman, maybe a little bit slower-footed linebacker. And I always found, even though I was not the strongest guy, so long as the scheme didn't confuse me, if I got my hands on the right guy, that guy didn't have a chance to stop me from pushing them where I wanted them to. And so I know that Army's defense was rated really high in terms of kind of national averages, but I just had this feeling that if we could get our hands on the right linemen, and there wasn't free blitzers blowing things up in the backfield, that there were going to be creases. And what you saw today early is what makes Jeremiah Love special, because he can take a crease midway through the line and all of a sudden turn that into a big gain, or come off the edge and hurdle a defensive back, or he gets one Mack truck, lane to run through. And people I was sitting with were standing up before he broke the line of scrimmage because we knew it was a touchdown. So,
are you sure they didn't have to use the little boys' room? Go ahead.
They didn't have to use the what?
Little boys' room.
It was fun to watch our O-line be as dominant as they were, but I'm not necessarily surprised. I want to see that type of dominance against a defensive front like we're going to see next week at USC.
Speaking of USC, and this will tie into this question from Mike, they have announced the kickoff time for USC next week. It's going to be a 3:30 game. So there were 3 options. There were 3:30, 7, or 7:30. They have narrowed it down to 3 time slots, and it is going to be 3:30. So when does Notre Dame fly out to LA? Going coast to coast is a lot of travel for college kids, not trying to be Downer or even Debbie Downer, but ND has some painful memories in the Coliseum. So how do they prepare? Boy, you packed a lot into that question, Mike.
I like it, Mike. I'm going
to let Bob answer this in a second from a player standpoint, because Bob made that trip before. But we'll ask Marcus for sure. I do think the game time was figured in, and they lean way into their sports science team for this stuff. Being a 3:30 kickoff, I still think they'll probably go out Thursday night, but they may go out Friday instead. We'll get the word on that for sure on Monday. But they have this whole week planned out in terms of getting the right amount of sleep, when they're going to practice, and now knowing what the kickoff time is helps. But Bob, you've made that trip out to USC. What's that trip like, taking at the end of the season? And is it a big deal? I mean, is it intimidating changing the time zones and going out there Thanksgiving and playing in that facility?
Yeah, so I'll say this. I think that it's a unique weekend, right? And so, Mike, we've got a lot of painful memories out there. I've got, at least 2 painful memories out there. But I actually don't think the travel necessarily necessitated that it was going to be a bad experience. But how we always did it with both Ty Willingham and Charlie Weiss when I traveled out there was we would leave Thursday after kind of a family dinner, right? So we'd have Thanksgiving dinner with the team, and then we'd get on the flight, we'd fly out there, and that would give us time to just kind of acclimate to there's a lot of things, the emotions of not being home for Thanksgiving and having a lot of things going on, end of season, like your entire campus is already home, and then getting ready for what was a really big game for us those years ago. That will still be a big game. I never found playing in the Coliseum difficult from an arena perspective, right? Like I think that there are places that you play where there's kind of a mystique and aura, and then the game is just the game. Like USC just whooped our tail. It wasn't because it was hard to play there. And so I feel like that's going to be a pretty similar experience for this team. I don't think the Coliseum is going to be so hopping that we don't know. I mean, we've shown that we can play on the road. We've shown that we can win at Kyle Field. The one thing I want to say about, traveling and what will effectively be a noon. Well, yeah, it'll be a noon kickoff local time, 3:30 Eastern, right? What I love about this team is the fact that we are just living in the realm where Marcus Freeman continues to learn from his mistakes. You look at last year, so many games on the road, whether we won or we lost, we started so flat. And we weren't prepared. There was something wrong with our countdown clock internally before these games. And when you look at this team that has gone on the road and played at different times in different venues in front of different crowds, we've figured out how to play Notre Dame football from the jump on the road. And that's really exciting to me, because I think when you are a much better team than your opponent, which we will be, you've got to just start the game and tell them we are here, business as usual, to keep the pedal to the metal. You don't want to start slow and end up, kind of falling behind. So I'm going to go ahead and say I think Coach Freeman has, whether it's with sports scientists or just his own gut feeling, whenever they leave is going to be the right time for them. And their internal clock of ticking down to kickoff, they're going to be ready to go to kick off from LA next week.
Bob, do you have time for one more question?
All the time in the world. My flight doesn't leave for another 8 hours. So
okay. We're going to say, guys, for this from Scott, how does ND's defense match up against USC, pass defense versus pass offense? Let me get to that one first, and then I'll let you jump in there. I'll let you formulate, because I have the numbers in front of me. USC is 67th in total defense. They're in the middle of the pack, just like that, with run defense and pass efficiency defense. Don't have much of a pass rush. Very good on third down, kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of takeaways. On offense, they're very imbalanced pass versus run. They're one of the more prolific. They are the most prolific pass offense Notre Dame will see. They have very good skill. They're not a really good pass efficiency team. That's why they changed quarterbacks. Very good at protecting their quarterback. But again, going from triple option to all that skill that USC is going to throw at you is going to be a little bit of an adjustment. But I think Notre Dame matches up well in this game, not overwhelmingly well, but I think Notre Dame has a lot of advantages if it plays the way that it's been playing down the stretch here. What you say, Bob?
Yeah, so let me talk about Notre Dame, then I'll talk about USC. Notre Dame has the versatility to throw a lot of different things at a quarterback. 2 seasons ago, not last year, but the year before, we had an elite pass rusher off the edge, Isaiah Foskey. But when we rushed Caleb Williams with Isaiah Foskey, Foskey would juke left, get outside of one guy, and then would be able to throw the ball downfield. He embarrassed our defense because we relied so much on 1 or 2 rushers to get to the quarterback. And then last year, we weren't even a prolific quarterback sacking team, but we had this constricting. I feel like there's like a new term, and that Coach Freeman talked about was kind of like this chaotic pressure, and we just constricted around quarterbacks. And we saw with Caleb Williams that when he had pressure around him, he was nowhere near as effective as when he was getting outside the pocket the year before. I think that we're going to bring a nice chaotic, constricting pressure to USC's quarterback. The one thing that I will say you will see on the field from this week to next week is the difference in speed. There are a couple of players on USC who have that kind of track speed that can turn just a little hole in between a linebacker and a safety and they can turn that into a 60, 70 yard, you're not going to catch them type run. And so we've got to be assignment sound in the secondary and in the linebacking core. And when you go against somebody who is going to throw the ball as much as they will, you will have your defensive backs get more tired than other games. And so I don't worry about our safeties. We've got plenty of them. But I mean, I'm looking at you, right? I'm looking at you, Christian Gray. I'm looking at you, Leonard Moore. Like, is there a time that we're going to need to tap somebody else in? And what happens when that next DB steps up? Because the quarterback's going to look that way. There's a chance that we get a couple interceptions in the first half, and the game's going to be out of hand. But this is the kind of game that's going to be explosive, and you just want to make sure you're on the right end of it.
That's a good point. I don't think Tate Johnson is ready to take high leverage snaps. Maybe Carson Hobbs. Maybe what Notre Dame has to do is put Jordan Clark out on the outside a little bit to give Leonard Moore a blow, and then move Rod Hurt over to nickel, which they've done before. So that's an interesting thought. Bob, we gave you some love here from Brett. But we're only going to limit it to one item of love. We do appreciate you joining us. Bob and I will be back after the USC game, and it won't be crazy late. It'll be later than this, but it won't be as late as it would have been a night game. Appreciate all of you asking questions, your comments, viewing us. You can live it all over again in the magic of YouTube replays. And you can leave comments after we leave, and I will check them out tomorrow. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Bob, and we'll see you next week.
Go Irish. Have a great night.